produce section at your local supermarket. You spot a luscious bin of fruits and veggies. But just as you reach for that juicy head of lettuce, you notice another bin of lettuce labeled organic. They look the same, but the prices are different. Well, that must mean the higher price is healthier, right? Well, today we're going to discuss whether organics are really the right option for you. Organics versus conventional farming methods. What are they really? Basically, organic foods are crops grown in a farming system that only use natural fertilizers to feed soils and plants. They use insects, birds, mating disruptions, or traps to reduce pests and disease. They rotate crops, till, hand weed, and mulch to manage weeds. They give animals organic feed and allow access to the outdoors. They use preventative methods such as rotational grazing to help minimize disease in livestock. Conventional foods apply synthetic fertilizers to promote plant growth. They spray insecticides to reduce pests and disease. They use herbicides to manage weeds and increase crop growth rates. They give animal antibiotics, growth hormones, and medications to prevent disease. The use of GMOs are also applicable in conventional foods. And basically what GMOs are they're genetically modified organisms, and they create these organisms inside the seeds. And then basically farmers purchase these seeds, and these seeds actually contain their own pesticides and herbicides inside. The USDA strictly prevents organic foods from using GMOs. However, not all organic is 100% organic. The USDA has a labeling system for organic foods, and they label them as 100% organic with the USDA organic seal. They have 95% or more organic ingredients, which means they do use some pesticides. You'll see the seal with this one as well. And made with organic ingredients means at least 70% organic. So they're using more synthetic chemicals, and then less than 70% organic ingredients is basically conventionally grown foods. And basically this is just talking about GMOs. It tells you what a genetically modified organism is. One of the things that are against the GMO debate is basically, are pesticides harmful to humans? Well, consider this. You drink coffee every day. That's a carcinogen that is poisonous to insects. You also consume chocolate, which is another carcinogen that's poisonous to animals in large doses. So not everything is poisonous to other insects as it is safe for you. However, with conventional farming, conventional farmers are able to include synthetic pesticides and natural enemies at their disposal when farming. These options are much more effective and require lower use rates and fewer spraying applications. They also have the ability to use GMOs in their crops, which contain the insecticide inside of the seed, so that less spraying is involved. But, like I said, what's poisonous to insects isn't always poisonous to you. In organic plantings, farmers are not allowed to use synthetic seed treatments through the use of fungicides to manage downy mildew disease, which spreads through infected disease, and the natural substitutes are less effective. In fact, organic pesticides, when they're sprayed on the plants, are not able to penetrate the semi-permeable membrane in the plants. So essentially, if you have a squash bug infestation, it'll destroy your crops in less than 3 days. And it's very difficult to get rid of it with organic pesticides. Now, the first generation of pesticides, when they were used in the 1940s, they were nerve agents that were used in World War II. DDT2 and DDT4 were one of the first pesticides, and they became illegal in the Endangered Species Act whenever they started noticing the brown herrings that were consuming plants from the farms were dying. The new generation of pesticides that we use on plants today evaporate in less than 14 days. They're mostly used to disrupt the mating cycle of the pests when they eat the food, so they don't exactly instantaneously die. It's like roaches. When you spray the pesticide on a roach, they don't die instantaneously. They take it back to the colony when the colony dies. They are also meant to control pests and disease that affect both livestock and plants without harming human consumption. Herbicides are different from pesticides in the way that they are plant hormones, and they literally force plants to grow themselves to death. They contribute to greater harvest yields. Fungicides are chemicals that destroy plant fungus that can cause botulism. So essentially, if you were to eat an organic grown food, they could have a fungus or a bacteria on them that will kill you if you just eat them straight from the ground. You don't want that. And the big question that we have here is, are organics more nutritious than conventional? No. Numerous studies conducted by the Food Standards Agency in the UK show that there are no nutritional differences between organic foods and those grown by conventional farming. Other experiments performed by the Stanford School of Medicine show no consistent differences in vitamin content. The only difference is phosphorus being grown in spinach, and you will have a slightly higher amount of omega-3s in organic milks. But this isn't enough to warrant the price. Now, there is a difference with the way that organics basically have their organic livestock, such as cage-free eggs and chickens. Again, there's no difference in vitamin content, but ethically speaking, free-range chickens have a greater life on the farm than conventionally grown chickens for eggs and meat. They have access to open range, so as you can see on the left, they're happy chickens, but the USDA only requires a minimum of 5 minutes per day for free-range chickens. So essentially, if it has the sticker that says cage-free, you don't know how long the farmer actually allows their chickens to roam. They could still be in these cages for the rest of their days. Now, are organic farming methods actually beneficial to the environment? Not quite. Organic farming is actually not very beneficial because organic farmers have to expand their farms exponentially in order to continue their crop rotation methods. This causes many farmers to file bankruptcy because the cost of land increases when the yields of their harvest decrease due to pest infestation, plant diseases, and higher costs of organic products. You cannot feed a large population of people solely through the use of organic farming because your harvest yields are 15% less to 50% less. Bankruptcy is common because they cannot keep up with these methods. The large amounts of natural fertilizers such as compost and manure contain more nitrogen than synthetic fertilizers, which causes greenhouse gases to be thrown back into the environment, which causes, of course, climate change. Another problem with organics is their costs. When buying organic, prepare to make a large dent in your grocery budget. Organics have been documented to be 3 times more expensive than conventional foods. And as you can see, a gallon of milk is almost going to be $5 compared to $1. Family of 4 with a very small grocery budget cannot consume organics entirely. So my solutions that I have for you today is basically buy from local farmers markets. Ask questions about the farmers and their methods and how they actually grow their foods and treat their livestock. Eat a healthy, balanced diet, regardless if it's organic or not. Now, studies show that people who do go and buy organic are healthier overall because they're more mindful of the things that they're consuming. They're more mindful of the product and trying to maintain a healthy lifestyle. So that could be contributed to the let's eat organic or not. Eat conventionally grown foods. It's not bad for you. If it was, we would see animals in the wild dying from consuming these pesticides and things like that. And basically, the future of sustainable agriculture relies on expanding farming methods with the land currently in use so that we don't expand and cause more deforestation and cause more greenhouse gases with natural manures and things like that. That's it.
Questions?
So, with what you presented of they don't use pesticides that are necessarily as effective. So, like things like fungicides or fungus or whatever can get in. You won't know if you eat it, you get sick, die. people that try to grow their own food, is that like, is it kind of in a way bad to try to grow your own food because if you don't know how to properly protect your crops from pests or whatever, and you eat your own food, you could like get sick? Yes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, on a smaller scale, if you go into gardening, first what you should do is probably learn how to actually garden and the natural pests that are out there. You don't want to consume any type of crop directly from the earth because of the things that they spray on them. But at the same time, it's like, you know, if you're out in the spraying fields and you're spraying, you can inhale pesticides and they'll damage your body. But what you want to do is actually, when you are growing a small amount of food and things like that, do it without any pesticides at all. Learn what to plant next to your plants. When I say crop rotation, you're basically placing other plants and crops that fend off other natural pests. So like one of the things that I've noticed with tomatoes, they get this natural like aphid that comes and attacks them, and different types of like fruit flies and things like that. If you plant onions around them, the onions will ward off those bugs and things like that. So that could be a safer method.
Have you heard of automated farming indoors? Japan has been trying to, because they have such small landmass, they've been trying to make it indoors, and they were able to increase their crop yield 50% and reduce pests because they have a controlled environment.
Yeah.
And don't use direct sunlight. They use I think it's LEDs.
Yeah, they've been doing that for years too. In other countries, they're called greenhouses.
Yeah. No, but I'm just saying, they're having it completely. I'll show you just later.
Like a biodome kind of thing. Yeah, that's cool. Never heard that one, but yeah.
So, couple of things to add, just to kind of think about this. Just as far as, because there are a couple parts of your argument that I think everyone could benefit from. You could benefit from exploring a little more.
I have a video too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So particularly the systemic pesticides part, right? So different between synthetic and systemic. Systemic being, of course, the ones you're talking about that are genetically engineered into the seeds. So we rely, as far as pollination goes, on bees almost 100% right now. We truck bees all over the country and release them into fields. What we do know from the studies of systemic pesticides that this is at least 50% or more responsible for the massive dying off of bee populations, right? And this is part of conventionally grown, right? A staple in conventionally grown food at this point. We also, it's really important to recognize that telling people that conventionally grown food and new systemic pesticides and the genetically engineered crops that those produce are entirely safe is something that nobody knows yet, right? Because we've only been doing this for maybe a decade, really, as widespread as we are right now. And the thing about USDA and the FDA in the United States is we generally have a policy of try things out. When it comes to food, we often have a policy when it comes to new technologies of try them out before really testing them deeply about what happens in the population. A lot of these kinds of foods have been loosely correlated with an increase in particular kinds of allergies, cancers, and that goes actually beyond just humans, actually into the other animal populations that you're talking about. And so we got to get a little more complicated and I think a little more complex of an analysis about what is actually deemed safe, how the term organic, you're right, gets applied to, in fact, many different kinds of practices that really don't look like each other at all.
Right.
Couple of other things just to consider, right, within the recommendations, right, beyond just intercropping and that method you're talking about. There are other kinds of permaculture practices, right, that don't in the end require any kinds of, because again, organic fertilizer, right, as you said, natural is a term, it's a contested term. You can talk about things as being natural and they may be very, very contradictory, right? And the idea of an organic compound is different than the sort of the way that folks understand the word organic, right? These are two very different words. It's the same word, very, very different meanings. And so, yeah, kind of looking a little deeper into the permaculture practices that you can find all over New Mexico, for example, is another option. Yeah, and I would be really, really careful recommending folks eat conventional food as much as you want because it won't harm you. Right. This is just not true, right? We don't have that data. Nobody can prove that. We have more data saying, in fact, that there are really large systemic problems that happen when we change genes, right? These processes naturally take tens of thousands of years. We've reduced that time by millions. We've created super bugs, super viruses, super bacteria by doing this. Those have affected animal populations, right? So it's beyond just what we consume. It's what we're doing ecologically by doing that practice as well. Right. So just, just be careful with that recommendation, that's all. But really, really well researched and well done. Apart from that, yes.
Also on top of that, I worked on an organic watermelon farm in Oklahoma, and when I was little, I actually grew up on an organic pineapple juice farm in Honduras. After speaking with my dad, who I hadn't talked to in a long time, he really got with me and talked to me about Monsanto and pesticides like glyphosate that have actually been very changing in the way that we prevent diseases in plants and things like that. And one of the things that he mentioned was that basically there are pre-genetic dispositions out there that are unfortunate and that people are having allergies every day that they are not aware of to things when they consume, and they've never consumed these things before. But one of the things that he made clear to me was that on almost every organic project that he's ever worked with, the farmer will go bankrupt very quickly because of these bugs that basically evolve past being able to consume the pesticides from the organics, natural pesticides that they spray on there, and they're not affected by it.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably the strongest part of your argument, right, is that USDA organic standards really not, like, we're not doing the work that we think we're doing when we buy organic, I think is one of the more important parts of your argument, right? If the folks have an idea that they're kind of saving the planet, or that they are really, really fixing the problems with conventional farming, which are massive problems, right? By buying organic with that USDA organic label, and that just simply isn't accurate, right?
And the shelf life of organics, we can't ship them overseas because they don't last long. They go bad in a couple of days. So essentially, you have to grow more, but your harvest yields are a lot less. And it almost seems like it's going to take more money to grow this way than it is beneficial for the population.
Yeah, and again, like, so the population is really important too. This is another part of your argument that I'd like to address a little bit, is so when we look at this globally, right, the effects of conventional farming, for example, in India, right, or in a number of countries in sort of Central Africa are devastating, right, have made it impossible for farmers to survive, right? Literally, there are mass suicides in India that were a direct response to Monsanto's conventional farming there. Because first, so there's also a political part of this process, right? Conventional farming practices, as we know them today, have made it impossible for farmers in a lot of countries other than the United States to survive, right? Even growing with Monsanto seeds, because we export everything out of those countries and then resell it inside of those countries. So, I mean, there's a political process that's also part of conventional farming that is entirely disrupting local farmers' ability to survive, right? And so beyond, right, you are participating in that when you buy conventionally as well. And so I think it's important to recognize, right, we can't make arguments necessarily about the healthy nature of it, but we can see what we are doing politically when we are purchasing that as well. Same thing, similarly, purchasing USDA organic, right? Again, why that's such a huge, I think, important part of your argument. So, awesome. Thank you for bearing with me, everybody.
I have a video, but I don't have to show it, so.
8:47. We only have 3 today, so go for it.
Okay.
GMOs are one of the most controversial areas of science. Genetic engineering is used in many fields, but even though medical applications like GM insulin are widely accepted, the debate heats up when it comes to food and agriculture. Why is that? Why is the same thing treated so differently? Let's try to get to the bottom of this and explore the facts, the fears, and the future of GMOs.
Marjorie, can you tell me how long
Humans
this
have been
video is?
genetically modifying plants and animals for thousands of years.
Okay.
Maybe a few of your crops had very good yields, maybe one of your wolves was especially loyal. So you did the smart thing and bred the plants and animals that had traits beneficial to you. Traits are just an expression of genes. So with each generation, those genes got more pronounced. After thousands of years, almost every single plant and animal around us is vastly different from its pre-domesticated state. If humans have been changing genes for millennia, what makes a so-called genetically modified organism, or GMO, different? Selective breeding is basically hoping for lucky hits. Genetic engineering eliminates this factor. We can choose the traits we want, make fruit grow bigger, immune to pests, and so on. So why are people concerned about them? Let's start with one of the most common objections to GMOs. Gene flow, meaning GM crops could mix with traditional crops and introduce unwanted new characteristics into them. There is a method that might guarantee complete prevention, but is a big anti-GMO argument by itself: Terminator seeds. The idea is that they could produce sterile plants, requiring farmers to buy new seeds every year. The very concept of this, however, caused a public outcry, stopping the technology being put to use. This brings us back to the unintentional spreading of engineered DNA.
So that's not true.
There have been cases of GMOs growing where they weren't planted, and traces of modified genes found in foreign crops. But GM plants can't run wild entirely. Many crops pollinate themselves, and all crops have to be related to mingle. There are also cultural methods like buffer zones to keep unintentional crossing at a minimum. But if it's possible in principle that a GMO could unintentionally cross with a non-GMO, there's actually a more important question. Is food that comes from GM crops different to food from non-GM crops? This question has been a major concern from the very beginning. GM plants that are destined to be eaten are checked for possible dangers, and the results are evaluated by multiple agencies. After more than 30 years and thousands of studies, the science is in. Eating GMO plants is no more risky than their non-GMO equivalent. But don't just take our word for it. Sources for this and other claims are in the video description. But what about plants that have been engineered to be toxic? For example, BT crops. A gene borrowed from the bacterium Bacillus thuringiensis lets engineered plants produce a protein that destroys the digestive system of specific insect pests. The plant makes its own pesticide. Insects that eat it die. That sounds alarming. Pesticide sprays can be washed off, while the poison in BT crops is inside the plant. But actually, it's not a big deal. Poison is really just a question of different perspectives. What's harmless to one species might kill another. Coffee, for example, is a poison that kills insects, but is harmless to us. Or take chocolate. It's dangerous for dogs, but a pleasure for humans. BT crops produce a protein that is tailored to the specific design of the digestive tract of certain insects. It's completely harmless for us. There's also the opposite approach, plants that are engineered to be resistant to certain weed killers. This way, farmers can use them widely, killing the other plants competing for resources without harming the crop. Here we get to the dark underbelly of GMOs.
What's that?
You want me to end it here?
Yeah, if that's all right.
Yeah, no problem.
So I'd like to know who produced that video, though.
Kirsty Hart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of things, but like BT crops failed entirely, right? To prevent pests. Again, like some of it, like it's really important to check the source of who produced that, because you look at where those were actually tested in India, and they didn't do what they were supposed to do either. So
Right, but I think also one of the things when it comes to farming is that it also deals with climate, soil, and environment is where it is. So I mean, these are also tested in the United Kingdom and the United States. So what doesn't work in one region of the world might work in the other regions.
that's true. That's a good point. Okay. Thank you, Marjorie.
All right, Crystal is up.